Joe Winko never liked any of the members of his adoptive family. He despised of how ignorant they all were towards him, and how they always excluded him and blew him off. But the one family member that Joe despised of the most was his adoptive sister, Jessica. Out of all of Joe's adoptive relatives, Jessica belittled him the most. She always criticized him on how useless his talents were and how insignificant he was to the rest of the family, which he really was never part of in the first place. The fact was that Jessica, like everyone else in Joe's adoptive family, really just thought of Joe as a foolish eccentric who had nothing going for him. She constantly threw it in his face and gave Joe a furious rage, which increased day by day like a hardening callus. Joe would often drown in his thoughts, thinking about all the times Jessica insulted him and belittled him, making his rage even stronger. "Those horror stories you write are so unoriginal, Joe. It's obviously all plagiarized," she'd always say. Sometimes, Joe would even vent to his adoptive parents on how he felt. "Don't talk about our daughter that way," they'd always snare at him. "She did much more for our family than you ever will." Knowing it was true just made Joe's anger unbearable. Day by day, the anger towards Jessica would just get stronger and stronger until he finally reached his breaking point. While everyone else at home was asleep, Joe Winko woke up in the middle of the night. At that point, he was completely consumed by his rage. Quietly, Joe got out of bed and opened up his dresser and pulled out a buck 120 hunting knife that he had ordered from Amazon.com. Joe knew that there was only one way to relieve himself from all the anger and rage he held inside. Jessica had to die. The next morning, Jessica woke up and made her way downstairs. Her parents were getting ready to head out the door, but before they left, they reminded Jessica that she had to drive Joe to work at noon. After her parents were gone, Jessica lounged on the couch and watched a cheap, low-budget horror film she found on Netflix. She peered at the clock on the television and saw that it was 1:45. She got up and made her way upstairs. Halfway up the steps, she called Joe's name, but he didn't answer. Maybe he didn't hear me, she thought. She called Joe's name again, but he still didn't answer. Jessica then walked upstairs and peered down the second-floor hallway. To her surprise, Joe's bedroom door was wide open. She walked inside Joe's room, but he was nowhere in sight. She also noticed that Joe Winko's work uniform was still hanging in the closet. Something else caught her eye. Something was sketched on the beige-colored wall above Joe Winko's bed. She peered closer, and written in small black penciled writing were the words, "Kill, kill." Jessica stood there, puzzled, and then she figured that it was just another one of Joe's creepy pranks. She became annoyed and called out his name again, but there was still no answer. The house was dead silent. She walked out to the second-floor hallway and noticed that the doorway at the top of the steps that led to the third-floor attic was partially open. Jessica walked up the steps and entered the third-floor attic. As soon as she was inside, the door slammed shut behind her by itself. The whole room was dark. Jessica could barely see anything. The only source of light available was the dim sunlight shining through the attic window. She looked on the opposite side of the attic and saw a shadowy figure hidden in the darkness. She recognized the shape of the silhouette by the pointy tip on his head. It was her adoptive brother, Joe Winko. "Come on, Joey, it's time for you to go to work," she snared. But there was no response from him. When Jessica looked closer, she noticed something very strange. Joe appeared to be floating off the floor, and he had something gripped in his hand. All of a sudden, the attic light turned on by itself, allowing Jessica to get a complete view of Joe. She then let out an ear-splitting scream. Joe's naked, castrated body hung from an old chandelier with his iPod headphones wrapped around his neck. His flesh was as pale as moonlight, and blood caked his body. His wrist and his throat had deep lacerations. Blood stained his flesh and the surrounding areas. His body was sliced open from the center of his throat all the way down to his groin, and his entrails hung from his lower abdomen, still dripping with thick blood. Blood stained his lips and his lower jaw. His lime-colored eyes were wide open, staring back at his terrified sister with an agonized look frozen on his lifeless face. Blood was all over the place. Jessica then noticed a blood-covered hunting knife clutched in Joe's hand. This could only mean that Joe had done this to himself. Jessica puked at the thought of it. She gripped her throbbing stomach and quickly sprinted toward the door leading out the attic. She desperately tried turning the knob, but it was locked. It turns out that Joe Winko had rigged the door so it wouldn't open after it was closed. Jessica was trapped inside the blood-filled room with the mutilated, hanging body of her dead adoptive brother, with her mental stability breaking apart. Jessica then felt her stomach twist violently at the grisly sight. She then inhaled the bitter amara of Joe's corpse. The stench of death poisoned her lungs and became unbearable. Smeared on the attic wall in Joe's blood were the words, "Kill, kill." The words echoed through her mind over and over again. Kill, 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 kill. She heard her adoptive brother's voice repeat in her mind over and over again, his voice getting louder and more violent each time. She desperately tried to cover her ears to drown out the voice, but it kept getting louder and louder. Joe's lifeless eyes stared back at her. His voice echoed inside her head. Kill, 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 kill. Jessica let out another scream of agony. She banged on the door till both of her arms were a bloody mess, but the door wouldn't budge one bit. She frantically spun around in circles, looking for an escape from the attic. She then sprinted towards the attic window, breaking through the glass, falling to her death.